This will be a difficult topic to do rightly, dears, but we're going to give it more than the old college try. We're aiming to do it justice. First, in order to frame this whole conversation appropriately, we must state several facts about the purpose and structure of American government up front. Per the Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, America is to guarantee a small r Republican form of government for the citizens. A Republican form of government is not a democracy. It is not an international empire. It is not an oligarchy. Second, the American government was formed for the purpose of securing the God-given liberties of the people of this federal nation, and their security in perpetuity to them and to their descendants, and those other persons lawfully admitted as citizens. That's it. That's the whole purpose of the United States government in a nutshell. Now, let's look and see what they did to us. Pillar 1. Understand and share domestic terrorism-related information. Even this very first sentence gives away a significant piece of the puzzle in determining what was done to us. In the aftermath of 9/11, there was a very large shift, ideologically, governmental, and socially, towards dealing with the threat of Islamist terrorism. The fear and fervour in the country were such that the extreme overreach of the Patriot Act was welcomed by nearly all. Such was the threat, recognised by nearly all Americans of Islam. Then, however, over the coming several years, a concerted effort by many in government and many non-governmental organisations, such as the stateside organs of the Muslim Brotherhood and many outfits funded by Qatar, undertook a campaign of information warfare to redefine this threat away from Islam and Muslims and instead towards radicals and extremists. Never mind the fact that Thomas Jefferson himself kept a copy of the Quran in order to better understand those he knew to be an enemy. Never mind that the terrorists from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, from Afghanistan to Iran, tell us they undertake all they do to the glory of their God and in accordance with the teachings of the Quran. The American regime committed to the "we are not at war with Islam" trope, and going so far as to purge from the National Security Council and other critical entities of the top experts on both Islam and political warfare at the behest of the Muslim Brotherhood. But we digress. The point here, in analysing this phraseology from this newly declassified document, is that it now goes even further in defining, in an official policy document, that carries with it the effect of law as the interpretation of the executive branch, the broad scope of terrorism capabilities and permissions granted to government over the prior decades now apply to terrorism-related items. Related is doing some heavy lifting here. Those familiar with our past lessons might correctly see this as the application of holistic thinking to the item. With the publication of this internal document, the government was not only interested then in acts of terrorist violence, but information that might be deemed related somehow to terrorism, or even more vaguely, to extremism. For movie buffs, this is the application of pre-crime to the war on terror. We'll go on to see how this holistic thinking then twisted to turn the government guns inward onto traditional red-blooded Americans. From here on out, the document will refer to the primary threat actor as simply DT, obviously a shortening of domestic terrorist, which obfuscates that what they really mean is their domestic political opposition, and as a humorous coincidence also forms the initials of Donald Trump. Next, we have Strategic Goal 1.1, Enhanced Domestic Terrorism-Related Research and Analysis subsection. Action 1.1.1a Produce, on a regular basis, analytic products on relevant aspects of the DT threat, including the transnational aspects, and disseminate those products expeditiously and as widely as appropriate across and outside the US government. Products, when appropriate, should include an analysis of radicalization, recruitment, and mobilization to violence and prevention issues. The lead agencies for this are the FBI, DHS, and NCTC. To measure their success here, they create a metric, Measure of Performance 1.1.1a. Determine percentage of increase in analytic production over the next 12 months. determine percentage of increase in disseminated products across the federal government, and separately, outside of the federal government over the next 12 months. Translated from bureaucratese, the reality here is the creation of an internal propaganda directive to shift the focus of both domestic law enforcement and intelligence agencies and international partner governments toward the DT threat. The metric is one of sheer quantity, completely ignoring quality and truth. The purpose was to flood the zone with professional-appearing reports, such as those these agents and partners have been seeing for their whole careers in the legitimate capacity of identifying actual terrorists, to now orient them against their domestic opposition instead. This is how they reoriented the entire federal apparatus and broke the brains of so many long-term federal agents that couldn't recognize the shift in paradigm, company men who just couldn't see through the boring language to the evil behind it. Put plainly, it was a mechanism for infecting the entire federal bureaucracy with Trump derangement syndrome. The aftermath analysis can point directly to numerous leaks from the FBI, DOJ, DHS, and others that repeatedly beclowned the organizations for labeling traditional Americans, Catholics, pro-life organizations, the OK hand symbol, various common memes, and many others as domestic terrorist-related, or the even more anti-constitutional domestic violent extremist label. These efforts were also expanded to both indoctrinate and recruit into their efforts state and local law enforcement, with Action 12.1b, provide resources to state, local, tribal and territorial law enforcement that cover relevant iconography, symbology and phraseology used by many domestic terrorists, as well as data-driven guidance on how to recognize potential indicators of DT-related mobilization. Lead FBI with DHS and NCTC. We can't have the local sheriff's deputy in the middle of Iowa seeing a kid in a Pepe t-shirt and not realizing he's probably about to shoot up a pet store and reporting this sighting to the feds. Maybe there's some extra funding to be had. Finally, this effort was also extended internationally to partner forces to participate in identifying Americans as terrorist-related. Between the random deputies, the NGOs, and now foreign intelligence agencies, there's little doubt any single Trump supporter could not be eligible, through some sixth degree of Kevin Bacon, to enhanced review by the Biden regime. Here's the item. Disseminate guidance and appropriate follow-up to U.S. country teams at diplomatic posts abroad to increase the priority of obtaining from foreign partners foreign intelligence and information related to U.S.-based violent extremism, overseas violent extremism and actors, and potential connections among them. Ensure that such foreign intelligence, once obtained, is appropriately and expeditiously shared across the U.S. Now, Action 1.1.1b. Promote understanding among other federal departments and agencies of criteria for and track domestic terrorism-related federal investigations, incidents, and prosecutions nationwide. Relatedly, review whether changes are needed to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, or NIBRS, to better track domestic terrorism-related incidences across the nation. Lead FBI and DOJ. And Metric Measure of Performance 1.1.1b, complete training sessions on how to report domestic terrorism-related incidences and review whether changes to NIBRS are necessary within 6 months. Knowing how much of the bureaucracy is data-driven and how politics, likewise, is reliant on data regarding both reality and perceptions, this action item creates the infrastructure and mandate to increase the number of tallied terrorism-related incidents by encouraging more reporting by state and local agencies. With this, they can then fudge the numbers to support wildly false narratives, such as white supremacy is the #1 threat to the nation, which we heard repeatedly during the BLM riots and in the midst of a neo-Marxist reign of terror. Of course, it is necessary to create these lies to maintain the facade of legitimacy and to keep those allies who want to believe such things active. Tying into the last, but significantly exceeding it in actual effect, with hindsight lending to this analysis, is Action 1, 1.1c. Develop and implement a mechanism for receiving relevant DT-related analysis and information from non-governmental experts, and share that information appropriately and consistently across the United States government. Lead Department of Homeland Security. And Measure of Performance 1.1.1c. Review quantity and quality of information received by non-governmental experts, including how much of the information is unique over the next 6 months. At this point, nobody should be unfamiliar with the NGO industrial complex that has arisen in America, which exists as the counter-state apparatus against the legitimate Republican government, also known as the government in exile. It performs the dirty jobs of information warfare and dominance, censorship, maintains the networks, logistics and command and control functions for AstroTurf street resistance and color revolution, and forms the explicitly ideological analysis and strategic think tank functions for the revolution. This action item handed these NGOs the capability and authority to laze their domestic opposition to guide the government bombs directly onto their heads in the form of Stasi-like secret police actions, Zero Dark 30 armed raids, knock and talk warnings, and more. Onto one that really looks rather okay at first glance, but almost certainly was weaponized in hindsight. Strategic Goal 1.3. Illuminate the transnational aspects of domestic terrorism. And Intended Impact. 13.1. The US government works with international partners to enhance information sharing on DT and to determine if connections across national boundaries are common among domestic terrorists and related or similar threats abroad. On the surface, we should expect any legitimate government operating constitutionally to keep track of foreign threats and foreign links to domestic threats. We're still waiting on such analysis to be done of Antifa networks. However, the reality of a government bent on revolution against the Constitution, suppression of a domestic contingent still loyal to the founding, and seeking broader powers to use in their efforts, can find significant authority, including lethal interdiction, in international ties. As terrible as the consequences could be, it's difficult to prove high crimes such as treason, sedition, and insurrection against Americans, especially when those Americans were on the side of the Constitution. You might note that no such charges were brought against the Jan 6ers. A foreign nexus, however, arguably shifts you from a prosecutable criminal to an enemy combatant. We saw how Obama used this precise argument for authority to drone strike an American citizen abroad, and agree or disagree with that particular use, there's little doubt that this action item was tied to the same theory. Action 13.1b. Assess and identify foreign entities and individuals linked to domestic terrorism under the relevant statutory criteria, and whether they can be designated as foreign terrorist organizations or specially designated global terrorists under the relevant statutory criteria. Lead by State and Treasury is best seen as an effort to work the investigation backwards from their domestic opposition to uncover any international connections or persons that they could label officially as terrorists, in order to then extend that terrorist label onto the domestic person. Action 13.1b. Assess and identify foreign entities and individuals linked to domestic terrorism under the relevant statutory criteria, and whether they can be designated as foreign terrorist organizations or specially designated global terrorists under the relevant statutory criteria. It's a show me the man and I'll show you the crime paradigm of guilt attached to the lethal seriousness of combating terrorism. We should expect that this was a reciprocal effort between various partner nations. If anyone might be curious where the impetus to debank American conservatives came from, perhaps we should look to Action 1.3.1c. Explore ways to enhance the identification and analysis of financial activity associated with domestic terrorists and related or similar threats abroad, as well as enhancing engagement with financial institutions on domestic terrorist financing, including through existing provisions of the Bank Secrecy Act. Led Treasury with FBI and state. This would also probably make a fruitful line of inquiry into efforts to create unique identifiers for firearms retailers and related purchases that could be rejected by card companies and banks. Further expanding on explicit propaganda efforts, Action 1.3.1e share transnational approaches, good practices, and lessons learned on preventing and countering RMVE across borders through multilateral foreign government, municipal, civil society, community, and expert exchanges, workshops, senior-level bilateral public engagements, messaging and resource sharing, and other activities, with inclusion of women, girls, and youth as relevant and appropriate. Lead state, DOJ, FBI, DHS, and USAID. These stakeholder groups are effectively the same entities used by the Soviets. In fact, that's what Soviet means, a stakeholder council. Stand by for part 2, where things get much worse, coming soon. Counterspell Group.